So this is okay. Just a second. Have you already shared a link? You can share. Oh no, people will see the YouTube channel.
So is it open?
Yeah, it is all good. You can.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's start. I'm going to do the first word for you. Okay. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's again great privilege for me to be in Wellington, to be in New Zealand. You might know it's my fourth visit. It was my first visit was in 2019, initiated by this fantastic lady sitting aside of me, our chair and patron and our chief executive officer, if I may say so, from Asia Pacific Security Innovation Forum. Since 2019, I think we have had the opportunity to cooperate quite a lot, quite intensively, and we have discussed many subjects and issues. And what I'm going to talk about today, but not only me, but we, so we are talking about what you can see on the screen, all of Africa and security in the Indian Ocean region. Earlier I talked about the hemisphere, and the hemisphere covers the Pacific region, covers the Indian Ocean, covers the Asian continent, and Oceania, of course, with Australia and New Zealand and the Pacific Islands. This gives us, I think, the opportunity to talk a little about the Indian Ocean and the security in this area, including then a little bit more in detail the Horn of Africa. And the next slide, please. What you see on this slide means to state the obvious. Everybody is familiar with, and we are aware of what are the key elements if we talk about security environment. However, I think it's worth to check some details. When I talk about geography, it goes without saying that it means mountains and barriers and rivers and the fertility and the ground, etc., etc. But it includes also geography, includes the oceans, and the oceans as such is not just the big oceans, but territorial waters, as you can see, regional seas, again the rivers, and of course the ports. We have the blue water ports, the deep water ports, and those in shallow waters, and they all matter. The next point, climate, has been touched already, I'm very grateful that Your Excellency mentioned the importance of the climate and the probably rising, or not probably, but most likely rising sea level and the impact, especially on the Pacific Island states. This is really of utmost concern, and it is a global problem. It is not a regional problem. However, I want to remind you, Joanna talked about regional solutions to certain problems, to certain challenges. This is true, but this does not mean that it is a regional problem. It is a global problem, and it affects us all. Whether you are in Oceania, in the Pacific, in Europe, in the United States, or wherever. And climate, of course, includes a lot of things. Temperature, the humidity, the risk of volcanic activities, which affect the climate as such, earthquakes, cyclones, tsunamis, and many other things which have an impact on all of us. Stability, the next point, relations on the national level, on international level, is self-explaining. I will come back to that later. But what is really of importance is if we talk about certain regions, then we need to talk about resources. about economy, finance, development. All they play a significant role, and this list is not exhaustive, of course not. They play a significant role in the context of security, and they are often enough key element of the competition and conflict with escalatory character, be it within states, intra-state conflicts, or between states and nations, so inter-national level. And I will show you some examples later, and please feel free to interrupt and to add certain additional thoughts if you deem it useful and necessary. Next slide, please. Well, this is a slide and some figures which are usually well known. And the numbers, they might vary a little bit, but in global terms, we need to understand that the Indian Ocean covers 50% of the worldwide container shipping. This is all running through the Indian Ocean. And it's about 70% of the oil trade worldwide, given that the resources of petrol and oil are mostly adjacent to the Indian Ocean region. 30%, this is an interesting thing, of the worldwide commercial harbor transaction is to be found in the Indian Ocean. This is less known. Most of us know big ships and container and oil tanker and all that running through the Indian Ocean, but the commercial harbor transaction, this is something, and these numbers are increasing. And this means that the trade exchange and the commercial activities in this region increase enormously. What is of importance is, and you are all aware of that, the significant choke points. We all know the Suez, the Channel, the Strait of Hormuz, Malacca, and all those marked with a red ring on the map. I just want to mention and to remind you that many of the significant security problems will be found exactly in the vicinity of these choke points, which is, again, to state the obvious, this is clear. But this is not the only remarkable phenomenon in this region, but there is something in addition. Please, the next slide. And this is again, and we talked about the People's Republic of China earlier, their Silk Road or One Road, One Belt initiative, you can name it as you wish, and it is depicted on the slide here. And this is a significant change in the, let's say, security, in the economic, in the trade, and also in the financial environment throughout the region. Because it makes the situation not easier. Here we find, interesting enough, a synchronization, I think this is the first point here, and a consequent synchronization of strategic and economic interests laid down by the People's Republic of China. And we must understand that Beijing is following a pretty aggressive and offensive attitude. We all know about the massive investments in harbors, in railroads, in pipelines, in infrastructure, and many other things. And this means not just economic or, let's say, infrastructural activities. It is something different. It is something additional. It is coupling financial and control elements via the transfer of shares, for example. And I earlier mentioned the contracts between China giving money to to other countries, to construct infrastructure projects. And once they are no longer able to pay back according to the contract, then China, People's Republic of China, has a transfer of shares of these installations. Which means, for example, that one of the major ports in Sri Lanka is now entirely in the hand of PRC, and this for 99 years. If we go further to Montenegro in Europe, there have been huge infrastructural projects, and Montenegro was no longer able to pay the rent. So the owner of all these infrastructural projects is no longer Montenegro now, it's China. And this means that this kind of contract is also kind of pressure and a kind of bullying even. If you are not aware and if you are not, let's say, prudent enough to avoid all these elements within these contracts. So we have connectivity initiatives, and we have, of course, fundamental risk because we now find more and more an atmosphere of unpredictability, of unrest, mistrust, and a growing perception of non-cooperation, but blackmail activities by People's Republic of China. And some nations feel threatened. And this competition leads to rivalry, it leads to animosity, it leads probably even to hostilities. And this is something we do not want to achieve. In contrary, we want to avoid it. Next slide, please. A key problem of the security situation are, of course, the root causes in the entire area. And since this is an unbelievably big area, which is small on the map, but we are talking about thousands of miles in each direction, and we are talking about more than 50 nations, either bordering the Indian Ocean or adjacent waters, or being very close to that. We can and we need to understand that we, by nature, find many, many interstate rivalries and conflicts, even wars. And we find intrastate conflicts. This is what I mentioned earlier. And they might cause even a spread out of the conflict, so that an intrastate conflict becomes an interstate conflict, and which might affect an entire region. There are some examples I will talk about later. Religion is an issue. I'm sorry to say that. Religion is an issue. And you might remember the book Samuel P. Huntington, early 90s, when he first published an article in the newspaper Foreign Affairs with the same title, Clash of Civilizations, and this article was heavily disputed. Because what he's stating is that the fault lines of future conflicts lie along the lines where religions meet. And I must admit, at that time, I did not want to believe it. I said, no, we have overcome this. It is not true. It is beyond reality. Okay, 30 years later, we must understand that many conflicts are indeed linked to religious differences. Whether religion is used as a tool, as an instrument by anybody or other authorities, or whether it is really a question of belief. A very sensitive issue, and I fully understand that many people do not want really to touch it, but in global terms, we must say this is an issue. It might even lead to violent extremism and terrorism. And if we take the recent developments, then we have terrorist groups like ISIS, we have Al-Shabaab, Boko Haram, Hamas, Hezbollah, and you name them all, this is a level of extremism, a level of terrorism, a level of violence, which was unheard of so far. Just remember ISIS. ISIS in Iraq and ISIS activities in Syria. This was a nightmare. And what has happened on October 7 is not better at all. It's the same level of cruelty and violence, and is absolutely unacceptable. We have, of course, one of the consequences is migration. So people try to find a better life situation for themselves and for their families, which is absolutely acceptable and understandable. The question is how many and where are they and how can they be integrated, if ever. Piracy is an issue, especially in the Horn of Africa and at the Strait of Malacca, for years and years and years. And it will continue to be a significant problem. Armed robbery as such. Illegal fishing, illicit trafficking, be it human trafficking, be it arms, drugs, very popular tool for illegal money production, etc. And the climate change consequences I already mentioned. If we go to the next slide, please, then I have some examples, and I would like to invite you to add a couple of comments because you are most likely far more familiar with many of them than I am. In the first place, I put India, China, India, Pakistan. Why that? Nuclear weapons. We are talking about nuclear weapons, ladies and gentlemen. So this has the potential to destroy the entire globe if things go wrong. Very close to India, Pakistan, China is Russia, again, nuclear weapons, Iran with nuclear ambitions, North Korea with nuclear weapons, and of course, other third parties are present in the region, like the United States, again and again and again with nuclear weapons. We had the expression nuclear-free zones earlier, next one. I want to quote you. Yes, that would be very, very helpful. The question is this achievable? And the next question is let's say, the range of today's missiles, even if they are not based in these nuclear-free zones, that long that you can reach each and every target on the globe if you wish to destroy it with nuclear weapons. So this is something we have to think about. The Middle East, we are aware of what's going on just now, and the newspapers are full of details and nasty things. I do not want and do not need to intensify the Middle East conflict. But the Middle East conflict is also fueled by the Saudi Arabia-Iran conflict. And this is again linked to religion, again and again. We find in Yemen, for example, mentioned a bit further down, we find a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So the Houthi rebels on one side, the traditional elements on the other side. Some of them are fed by Iran, others are fed by Saudi Arabia, and all of them create a lot of trouble, a lot of violence, a lot of losses, unrest, and a terrible living situation for all those who are in that area. Somalia, Myanmar, Somalia is a failed state, ladies and gentlemen. I have been there. I have been in many of these areas, and I must clearly state Somalia has a bubble of security in the capital, in Mogadishu, but this security is questionable. And outside of Mogadishu, there are others ruling the world. It is in this context Al-Shabaab, for example. It is for sure not the government of Somalia. Whether you can speak of a government of Somalia is another question, because Somaliland in the north and Punjab and other areas are beyond their influence. Next slide, please. And if we go a bit closer to the Horn of Africa, then we must clearly understand that the regional threats and all the details over there have the potential to last for many, many, many additional years. And the question is, if the world population, whether the world population, the nations, the United Nations, the Security Council has still enough energy, enough power to concentrate on these conflicts to try to find a solution, or whether they are completely absorbed by today's problem in Ukraine, today's problem in the Middle East, and today's problem with China and hopefully not Taiwan in the near future. And my fear is that this will be either forgotten conflicts or frozen conflicts, but definitely not conflicts finding a solution for all the parties involved. Eritrea is a black box. We don't know very much about that. What we are faced with is that the exile population outside of Eritrea has two groups. One in favor of the regime, and the other one heavily opposing the regime. And you might have heard of the fact that especially in Germany, funny enough, there have been heavy clashes between these two groups. Because one of the groups wanted to make, let's say, a pro-favor Eritrea event, and the opposing party showed up and tried to destroy everything. And the police was not able to handle that. They were completely surprised, and they were not only surprised by the violence, but also by the level of violence in this context. Ethiopia, civil war, Tigray region, a nightmare. And we might come back to this issue when we talk about MENA a little bit. And Somalia, I already mentioned, Djibouti. Djibouti is an interesting case, and I recommend to go to Djibouti just for curiosity purposes. I've been there a couple of times. And interesting enough, Djibouti has been very closely linked to France throughout the years. And after a while, the United States showed up and tried to set up a military base in Djibouti, and the Djibouti government agreed, a lot of money, and the US set up very close to the French base, a US base. And after a while, again, China showed up. And China set up a base unseen and unheard of so far in Djibouti. And they paid a lot of money. And it is very, very interesting that the reason and the argumentation presented by Beijing at that time was, we need a base for our ships participating in the anti-piracy operations of the European Union or NATO or third parties. So this was the original reason to set up such a base. This base now will allow to fight piracy in the entire universe. So big is it. So this is much more than just to harbor one ship or two or three. So it is huge. And I think it's a military first military footstep of the Chinese military forces in Africa, on African soil. And that's not the only thing. In Djibouti is originally, from end of the 19th century, a railroad to Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. By the way, the seat of the African Union, an important place. And this railroad was in a very, very terrible, in a bad condition. Originally built by Germany, by the way. One day, surprise, surprise, activities and work started, and China repaired and restored the entire railroad between Djibouti Harbor, Djibouti City, and Addis Ababa within 2 years. And we must understand that this is a huge investment in infrastructure and influence in the entire region. And of course, Ethiopia will have had very much appreciated this project and have some kind of gratefulness towards Beijing, which is quite normal. Well, Sudan, South Sudan is very much linked to oil and to resources. And Yemen, I already spoke about that. So we see that in the entire region, we have a lot of traffic, we have a lot of economy, we have a lot of problems, of challenges, of unrest, of intra and interstate conflicts, and we have a big competition at sea and under the water, in the water, underground. What is the expression then? For submarines. And this competition has to do with the Chinese ambitions concerning their armed forces. They are constructing now carrier groups. They are building submarines with long distance. China is corresponding to that accordingly, of course. And we must take into account that carrier groups are made for power projection only. You cannot do anything else with a carrier group, with aircraft on such a ship. It is power projection. So if Beijing says, well, we take care of our vicinity and of our close neighborhood, why do they need carrier groups then? And they intend to build many. And this happens also in the Indian Ocean, and these problems are fueled by presence of other nations like the United States. Doesn't make it easier. So we have China, we have India, we have the United States, and whatever UK and France does in this area is widely unknown, but it is an issue of concern. So how to handle this? Next slide, please. Politics is the art of the possible. That's a nice thing. But what is possible? What is achievable? What is not? Next, please. But what we need to do is we need to try to anticipate what we have to expect. It is difficult enough. Because probability or predictability and things like that is pretty difficult. And what we need to do, and this is one of our ambitions here with Apsi, is to create policy recommendations. Are they accurate? Are they reliable? What kind of tools can we use to avoid wishful thinking, but to stay realistic? Next, please. And this brings me to strategic analysis and critical strategic thinking, but this is not the domain of Professor Everett. But what I want to mention in this context, again, and please next slide, is this is for me a significant, important picture. When I say that during the 20th century, the Atlantic Ocean was the dominant area in the world due to the conflict between the United States, the Soviet Union, the nuclear arms race, and NATO and Warsaw Pact. This shifts now to the Pacific and to the Indian Ocean region. This is the region of the 21st century, and it is just about to begin. I think I will open doors which are already wide open here in this context, that we need to have far more attention and far more understanding, far more knowledge of what is going on in this huge region here than we know so far. Thank you so far. Anita, please, your turn.
Okay, I'd like to add. Yes, Djibouti especially is an interesting case. It enables other external powers to monitor communications and military activities in the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. And other countries that I want to talk about is Ethiopia. Geographically, Ethiopia is the only country that shares a land boundaries with all countries in the Horn of Africa. And I think you have my handout. But although Ethiopia no shared land boundaries with Egypt, Ethiopia and Egypt currently have dispute. Dispute happened because of Nile River. And Egypt find it beneficial from the tensions or escalation of conflict, internal conflict in Ethiopia. For example, when Morsi was in power, the cabinet of Morsi tried to establish Ethiopia, and the Gumus militia was considered or was suspected getting assistance from Egypt. Another interesting case is Eritrea. Eritrea assisted Somalia in the form of shipments of arms of Al-Shabaab, the terrorist group. Somalia is also an interesting case because Iran tried to smuggle weapons to Yemen using a third country, which is Somalia. And Somalia is, I'm talking about why it is interesting. Somalia has the longest coastal lines, and as a result, it is vulnerable to piracy and terrorism. Sudan and Eritrea are very significant frontage of the Red Sea. Now, we talk about, General Hageman talk about conflict in Yemen, Houthi rebels, and it is necessary to analyze the conflict in Yemen and the implication for the Horn of Africa. Because even though geographically they overlook Bab el-Mandeb Strait and the Horn of Africa and the Suez Canal, it is actually beyond the geographic proximity. So the conflict in Yemen, as Major General Hageman has said, has ramification. And I think I want to talk about Djibouti again. Djibouti made a deal with China, okay, to establish a military base. Major General Hageman has said so. But there is a question that we need to think about. Okay, Djibouti open to China because Djibouti wants to have the first African space port. And again, one question is, will it enable Beijing to control the strategic Red Sea route? This is one question that we need to think about. So when we talk about critical thinking, we need to be able to think beyond what is currently happening. But we need to think about what is the ramification of current situation. I think that's my commentary.
Yeah,
So,
please.
okay, so Tony from Upney. I just want to make an observation on that. Now, okay, USS are based there in Djibouti.
Yep.
Okay, the French was always there for some time,
Yep.
and the Chinese came in. I just want to work out, you know, how, if China say they were gonna do the polishing work within the Swiss or Red Sea or Horn of Africa, how would that, or how has that worked? Do we know, you know, it has worked as per what they came in for? Do we have any evidence of whether they had, you know, anything to do with what they initially came in to set up the military base?
This is very interesting. This is a very good point.
Yeah.
If I take the Beijing policy, if I understand it correctly, I'm very prudent. My Chinese skills are zero,
Right.
zero. The language, I mean, probably I misunderstand things slightly or more. This is very difficult. But my understanding of the policy, especially if we take the initiative one road, one that, the key target is for the time being Africa. And if the key target is Africa, then they try to use various tools at the same time. One of the tools, already for years now, has been great infrastructure projects. I remember I've been in the Central African Republic, not a place which I recommend to go to, but, sorry for them, but I found there a huge stadium, a huge sports stadium, like a big stadium here in New Zealand for the All Blacks. Huge, for thousands of visitors. And I thought, my God, why that? Who built that? Who paid for that? It was China. It was China giving the money, producing this infrastructure with their own means and capabilities, with their workers, so that the local population had little benefit of all the activities over there. However, the regime received a lot of money, and this is of course linked to corruption. So this was the origin of the Chinese, let's say, power projection into Africa. Big infrastructure projects. The second was physical presence, or to start with physical presence in the shallow waters, especially in the Horn of Africa. And then they used, at that time, the anti-piracy operations, which I already mentioned, to be present there. And this was then the justification to set up this military base. Again, there was a flux of money unimaginable, and I'm pretty sure that many folks in Djibouti have now pockets full of money, and I wouldn't be surprised if there has been a lot of corruption again. And we can complain about that or not, but I think it is reality. So then they set up the infrastructure project with this railroad. And then they continue to bring in forces which are based there on a more permanent basis. So this is the key target. And the key target is not only to be present there, but to avoid others to play a dominant role. And others, that means of course the United States, that means of course Europe. So the influence of Europe is diminishing. The influence of the United States is almost at zero for the time being on African soil. And we must know that. So this is something which we have to take into account, but we need to understand it better. As I said earlier, we need to learn more. And what we need is specialists who can deal not only with translation of what has been said in Beijing, but also what is the meaning behind what has been said. So one is the message, literally, written, laid down, but I think the more important message is what is behind. And there we have far too few experts who understand that. And probably we rely on the wrong ones, I don't know. One key concern for us is that we have the feeling that China believes, if I say China, I mean the regime, that they believe that the West, the so-called West, forgets bad things within 20 years. And there is some truth. If we take the Tiananmen massacre in 1890, and we go 20 years further, nobody talks about Tiananmen any longer, and nobody cares about that. Everybody is just interested in big deals, money, trade, and whatsoever. And then we must know that at the end of the years 48, the foundation of the People's Republic of China will celebrate its 100th birthday. And if we count 20 years back, then we end up in 2028. And if Beijing intends to reintegrate Taiwan by violence, and if they really follow this 20 years approach, then they will do it before 2028. This is one of our key concerns. And if we take now the procurement and the armament programs, and the power projection means, and the aircraft, and their activities in the context of nuclear weapons, we might be not too far away from this thinking. I hope I'm wrong, but I'm not the only one assessing the situation like that. But this is indeed a key concern. And our main problem is the lack of understanding and the lack of assessment of what is going on there. It is still a secret what happens in China, and only very few understand it better. And we must listen to that. What do you think?
Yes, I agree with you. But, I don't think I will need to add more, especially because of the time. But I believe the answer of Major General Hageman has addressed your question. Yeah. So
Any further remarks, ladies, gentlemen?
one more.
Yes, please. Sir.
Are you finished? Just, have you finished yet?
Yes, yes.
Okay, sorry. No, I fully understand and appreciate your point about the lack of transparency and knowing what's going on and the reasons behind some of the things that China is doing right now. But one other point that's very hard also to understand. If you look at the huge gap between U.S. What it has now as the top military power and what China has is a massive gap. If we speak about these Chinese carriers, I think they have about 2. Maybe they're building others.
Operational now, yeah.
The United States already has 12 plus.
Yep.
The United States also spends 10 times more on military spending, building up its forces right now, than the 10 next powers put together. I mean, that again is a massive lead and a continuing build-up of a military force. And then we look at China, and we saw earlier on, it was interesting to see that China has growing global interests to take care of. understandable. And so I think the information that was given earlier, you can almost understand why they want to have a military capability that is capable of looking after those interests, particularly given the lawlessness we just seen before
Yeah.
in these parts of the world.
Yeah.
So it's when the Chinese argue that this is legitimate and not build up of the military forces. I think their army is the biggest, but they're not going to march very far from China. I think the technology today for war is, as we see in Ukraine, is very, very different. As Russia is finding out. So I'm just, I understand this lack of transparency, but does China have a case for wanting to actually build up at least the capability to defend and its interests, which are growing all the time around the world? I mean, that's a question that we really need to
very
ponder over.
Yeah, this is very good.
Interesting to hear.
I just can say I appreciate very much your remarks, and this is really of utmost importance.
Yeah.
And I would not believe that I'm in a position to argue extensively in this context. I simply do not really know enough about that, but some details I know. The key development phase of China in economic, technical, and financial terms was, if I understand it correctly, under Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping opened the economic society or the economic world for transfer into China and for transfer out of China, so import, export. I think Deng Xiaoping, he was one of those who did not concentrate on military means and capabilities, not really. For him, it was obviously much more important that the population has benefit from this development. The question now is, since this has been a real big progress during about 10, 15 years, why is it necessary now to build up such a huge force? Why is it necessary? And I would like to understand it better. I fully agree. I do not expect Chinese infantry units marching across the Asian continent to attack Germany, for example. What a nonsense. I don't believe that. And I'm pretty sure that future wars include only partially the use of military means. Many other parts are conducted with means which are beyond military characteristics. As we can see, cyber war, battle of narrative, space war, and things like that. And there the Chinese might be pretty well developed already. This is possible. So for me, still the reason or the question remains, why do they feel the necessity to spend that much money, because for them it is much money, to compete with military capabilities with others? It is beyond any argumentation that the United States have, let's say, the biggest budget, have the most potent and technically developed military forces in this world. Yes, but at the same time we must understand that many nations in the world, covering the entire globe, rely on the security guarantee of the United States. Europe does, Australia does, New Zealand to a certain extent, and Japan does, Taiwan is critical issue, and many others as well. So they have a global outreach, whereas China, so far at least, never said, well, we want to be globally present with our military forces. But it is a fantastic issue, and thank you for this remark. It deserves many, many additional studies, and this is something we can probably take into account for one of our future events. Thank you very much.
If I may add to this.
Yeah, of
It
course.
was interesting, you know, those big maps, and you said about the criticalness and the importance of the Indo-China Pacific region
Yeah.
for navigation, maritime.
Yes.
I think at the moment, China can easily be contained from using that, given what's already there in terms of military bases by the United States. I think that's a fact.
Yeah.
They can be shut off there.
Yeah, let's take Diego Garcia.
And if they go in the other direction,
Yeah.
go east,
Yeah.
they can also be easily contained.
Yeah.
So one can see the logic behind China
It's very
wanting to at least have the capability, as I said, to be, because I think it's a fact. They can be easily kept in
Yeah.
the China Sea right now
Yeah.
and not go anywhere.
Yeah.
If there is a breakout of any military. So, and then we see that Belt and Road, one connecting to Europe. You know, I thought maybe that's one of the reasons why, you know, that is a route that at least they can use to reach one of the most important critical part of the world in terms of economy and economic growth. So maybe there is that kind of logic. What do you think?
Yeah,
Because they
absolutely.
can be easily contained
Yeah,
right
totally
now,
agree. Yeah.
where they are, given what the United States has already put in place in the Pacific and in that part of the world.
This deserves a proper seminar. What you are saying.
Sorry?
This deserves a proper seminar, a proper own seminar, because your points are valid, your points are very, very interesting, and I'm sure that we should try to jump on that, because it is really very interesting. And even more exchange of views. Very good. So thank you for that. I really appreciate
But
that. Yeah.
those really, it's so easy to see the
Yeah.
strategic, where
But
we
only few are able to see that. Only few. There are not many. Too often we are too, let's say, limited in our view. And this is one of the key problems. This is the reason why I said we have to learn more, we must understand better, and we must dive deeper into, and we must understand what is behind what they say and what they do.
I think, thank you. I think the time
I
is
think Maxwell wanted to say something?
Yeah, I did have a comment to make,
Okay,
if that's
just-
all right. It was about, and I think it's important for our discussions to have some facts, because often, I think of that example of Iraq was Hussein. The world was led to believe that he had these stockpiles of chemical weapons, and therefore it gave the US a right to march in there and take over. And they never discovered one bit of evidence once they got there. And I must admit, I'm a little bit sort of suspicious when I hear that China's got 100,000 boats here or there, or so many. These are their ambitions. Where let's look for facts. I think one fact is going to outweigh anything else that we can know if it's provable and obtainable. That would be my only
Very good.
my main thing. And I think also when we get to this discussion of religion, perhaps we should be having a seminar just on religion, because that's been a pretext, of course, for what's going on now in Israel and what happened in the Holocaust. So I think we want to be really careful about how we progress when we talk about religion.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So,
Just a last comment. You know, this is not your lecture on security, but the first one. You know, it kind of goes into that lecture that was presented earlier, which you commended, and with Dr. Lucas. Can you put the last slide on? Your last slide.
My last slide? Yeah, yes, please. Guys, help me, please.
So that was interesting because
You mean the
you
slide
said
with all
that the
of Holland?
21st.
Yeah?
Is in our
That
region.
one here?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's in our region, and you know we are affected.
Yeah.
All of us here.
Yes.
So we are affected here. So that's why you know I just want to draw your attention to us smaller countries like His Excellency has already presented earlier on.
Yeah.
You know our focus and our mindset right now is development.
Is what?
Development.
Yeah.
Okay, I know you from Germany.
Mhm.
You are developed.
Mhm.
Okay, the rest are developed. We are the last to be colonized, and we are trying to find our way in the family of the world.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where development issues come into play. And we are all inundated with what we're going to do to make ourselves be part of the, you know, developed world. And that's where we are aiming. In so doing, we need to look at, you know, ways and means to get us on the road. One of those is China is providing them.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah. I heard of. I heard
Yeah,
of.
yeah. So that's why, you know, we kind of caught in between. Although
Yeah.
at independence, we you know, we
Yeah.
got the democratic ideals and all this, adopted that from our colonizers.
Yeah.
That is inbuilt in us. We know.
I.
But they've gone. The colonizers have retracted, and they're now looking after their own countries. And they want us to stand on our own feet. And therefore, to do that, we don't have the capacity all of the time. And that's why we need to look elsewhere. And one that provides us avenues for us to have the development, you know, for our country. Moving forward, at this stage, seems to be China. That's the way most of our trades, because we are primary, you know, producers, most of our trade and other things go through China. So we are caught in that.
Yeah.
You see.
I understand this. And this is.
And so, your point and that Joanna's point
Mhm.
about being aligned, you know, we need to align,
Mhm.
start making decisions.
Mhm.
Because our foreign policy, most of us, the Arab nations, you will agree, is friends to all, enemies to none.
Yeah.
Enemy to none.
Yeah.
That's the basis of our foreign policy.
Yeah.
So it's now, you know,
Yeah.
we're kind of thinking, you know, how? Yes, the big boys can come and play their game in our region, but you know, our people, you know, are not up yet.
Yeah.
We are not up to that level yet.
Yeah.
Because when you are developed countries, when you are talking at that level. And we are not there yet. We are down there. You see, we can't talk at that level.
Excellent. This is excellent. I fully agree. And
Yeah.
this
You
is.
you need to see
Yeah.
our side of the house
Absolutely.
in full.
Yeah.
In full.
Yeah. I can tell you that these arguments find more and more attention, at least in Europe, and I believe also in the United States. Because what you say is that the West shows up and tries to impose
That's right.
that's
the
behavior,
That is the
values, and whatsoever.
Yeah.
And the Chinese, they show up
Yeah.
and offer action.
Yeah.
Then that's a big difference.
You see, sin
And
is
this is not
believing.
very smart from us.
Sin is believing. Sin is believing.
Yeah, and this is not very smart from our side, and it is much smarter from the Chinese side. Yes, so I fully agree with this perception. And what lacks is that if we start to talk about values and impose our way of thinking and our ethics and whatsoever,
Developed way of thinking.
yeah. Then at the same time, we must offer venues to get there.
That's right.
And this is lacking for the time being.
That's
This is one thing. And the other thing is, and there I would say, well, I have a different opinion. If there is a bad guy, you cannot be friend with a bad guy. You cannot. Well, you can have relationship with a bad guy because you cannot avoid it. And this is probably someone who is really dominant, and you can't escape. But what you can do is to address that he has bad behavior or probably bad intentions, that he wants something you do not really appreciate. So this is something what you always can do. I think what we have not done so far, is to state clearly enough our, let's say, accusation of misbehavior let's talk about China in this context. And one of the key, let's say, partners, nations, is amongst us. Your country, yeah, is years and years and tens of years now under pressure and under suppression of China. So, and you have to name that. And you have to say, well, this is not okay. This is against the self-determination of people. So if Tibet desires to regain independence, sovereignty, it is their proper right to do so. So we have various things. So I'm far away of saying that we, the West, if I may talk as a representative of the West, that we do always the right things, and that we are smart. We are not. We are not smart, and we do not always the right things. Yeah, and often enough we are far too stupid. Yeah, and I see what representatives from our government. I am not. I'm here in my private position. What they run around through the world and say and value this and value that and value whatsoever, and all of them say, polite as they are, yes, okay, understood, but nothing happens at the end of the day, because it doesn't help. But this is again a very, very important point, we understand that many nations find themselves a little bit squeezed between, let's say, opportunities, necessities, threat, challenge. Yes, okay, yeah. And if we want to help you, well, we need to present action and not just talking. So sorry.
I just want to follow up my colleagues.
Fantastic.
It's interesting that China puts emphasis on infrastructure development. It's very interesting.
It is.
Because that's one of the most expensive and the most useful thing that needs to be built for development.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
Yeah.
And that's what China is doing.
Indeed.
I remember, if you look at Africa now, I remember when in the 1990s, last week in Samoa, in Apia, the Europeans, the EU, and what's called the Asia Pacific and Caribbean Group, ACP, signed a 20-year agreement, technical and aid and cooperation. That's the vehicle that the Europeans have, the EU has been using in the last 50 years to channel aid to Africa, former colonies, and former colonies in the Caribbean and in the Pacific. Last week, as I said, they had this huge signing in the pier in Samoa of the fourth agreement since the two joined. I remember when I was based in Brussels for a while and working on this relationship with the Commission, European Commission. Africa was then considered a basket case. You know, the Europeans had moved away, and the United States was not interested in investing there, so there was hardly any investment. So who moved in? China.
Of course.
And then finally, Africa economies just grew, and now the way, you know, economic growth, and now they're becoming very vocal and very independent and growing. And again, if you look at what China did there, they invested a lot in infrastructure.
Absolutely.
This Belt and Road thing is new, but even before that, they were investing in infrastructure. And that's what we in the Pacific have found to be very useful, and where China moved in, where our traditional supporters and donors were not interested. You know, I think you made the point that the European donors said what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
They didn't listen to what the other countries needed.
Yeah.
So I think there's some big lessons there to be learned. And I know that China, in my own country, there was a lot of things we wanted to do, but our traditional donors said no. That's how China, China moved in and did it. And suddenly our traditional donors started saying, no, I'll do the other part. They started wanting to do it too. So you can see where that places us in terms of, as my colleague said. And if you heard, in my, we're a traditional society. We start from a very low base of technological development, of capital accumulation, of knowledge, and the capabilities are very to begin with. So development is a long-term process. We've been told to stand on our 2 feet for quite a while. It's much too difficult when your competitors are that many years ahead of you. And that's, globalization did that. We had some start on some businesses and manufacturing when globalization came, but that was all under protection. When globalization and markets opened up, they got wiped out. And it's still the same today. We still have to compete at global markets, open markets, but we're still a long way behind technologically, in terms of capital accumulation and all the know-how, diseconomies of scale, small distance from markets, all those things. So those are the challenges, and I think you can see why the Pacific Islands, although they understood, they didn't like communism, we're quick to accept what China was offering. So I think there's a lot there.
I just say I'm particularly impressed by this discussion, and it shows again and again and again how necessary it is that we exchange this kind of views and this kind of information. I think this is an added value for all of us, but especially for us here. that we have to think about how to continue, what kind of subjects should we treat more intensively, and given what we just learned, there's a lot of room for lectures and for discussions. Thank you very much for that. I have nevertheless to stop here because we have, before we go to our lunch, we have another subject. What I missed earlier is to say a couple of words concerning our chair and patron, Professor Dr. Anita Albert. She is, as I said, the founder, the chair, the patron of Asia Pacific Security Innovation Forum and Center of Excellence. Her initiative and her, let's say, restless work to go forward with that. She is very humble, as you know her, but I want to mention a couple of stations of her academic career. Bachelor of Science, Master of Education, Master of Professional Studies, PhD Political Science, Charisma University, studied at the NATO Defense College in Rome. No, you were a fellow member. Thank you. And is now, in the meantime, professor at Charisma University. And I think this is an impressive academic career. And I didn't want to miss the opportunity to mention this to the entire audience. Sorry for being late with that. Anita, the floor is yours.
We started late. I think we started almost 45 minutes late. Actually, I should talk for 45 minutes, but I can do it in 20 to 30 minutes. And I believe you have the handout. The topic is about the geopolitics of naval powers in the Middle East and North Africa. First, I'd like to remind you the importance of naval powers for securing safe trade flow, as we know, oil flow from the Persian Gulf into Europe, and of course the United States, and securing sea lines of communication. As we know, it is a maritime route between ports to secure trade, logistics, and naval forces. And naval powers also useful for deterring aggression. For example, in the case of Red Sea. Red Sea is a strategic route for the navies of external powers, and this is where the naval power is required. And in the Arabian Sea, U.S. Navy seized weapons. This is one of the examples deterring aggressions at sea. Another role is to reinforce alliance relations. As we talked earlier, in the case of Indian Ocean hosts established and emerging naval powers. So these are the examples of the importance of naval powers. And how do naval strategies of major powers in the MENA influence regional stability and security dynamics? First, I'd like to mention the role of Iran. It is very crucial to mention the role of Iran. Iran has ambitions regionally and globally. Regionally, of course, it is related to the Red Sea. As I said earlier, Red Sea is a strategic route for the navies of external power, and also shipping lanes. And another one is Bab el-Mandeb Strait. It connects the Gulf of Aden, as you can see, Gulf of Aden and Red Sea, and ship moving to and from Egypt and the Suez Canal. That's the importance of Bab el-Mandeb Straits, and Iran realizes that it is important. And how about Suez Canal? It is the route for energy from energy and communication. If you have a look at the Suez Canal, from Asia and the Middle East to Europe. Another one is Strait of Hormuz, the top. As you can see, this is the narrow waterways entrance to the Persian Gulf, right? From the Gulf of Oman and then the Arabian Sea. Another one is Gulf of Aden. Gulf of Aden, also a vital waterway near Somalia. And the Persian Gulf, as you can see, the Persian Gulf, it is actually one of the most militarily supported by Iran. And Eritrea, also Somalia and Sudan. And I'd like to talk about the role of Egypt and Israel and why Iran is concerned about Egypt and Israel and try to influence Egypt. Egypt and Israel, this is the foundation of the Middle East politics. Examples, well, I give you two examples. During Mubarak's time, Mubarak resisted violence toward Israel. But the protest means that Mubarak had to face a lot of opposition. And during that time, President Obama was actually on the side of the protesters. And as a result, President Morsi took over. And as you know, President Morsi has relations with Muslim Brotherhood. Another example, during Camp David Accord, it has direct or indirect ramification on the Red Sea. Egypt wanted to have closer relations or cooperation with Israel over Sinai and the Red Sea matter. But of course, Syria and other countries in the regions didn't like these actions of Egypt and attempted to punish Egypt unilaterally. To disagree with unilateral attempts of Egypt to make peace with Israel. So there are two cases why the relationship between Egypt and Israel is actually the foundation of the MENA politics. Okay, move on. How do naval powers in the MENA regions contribute to the proliferation of weapons and armed transfers? And what are the key mechanisms and routes for such transfers? As we mentioned earlier, the Red Sea is important. It lies between Europe and Asia, and it also has the vital corridor, Mediterranean and Indian Oceans. And I said earlier, Indian Ocean hosts established and emerging naval powers such as Russia, the United States, and Asian countries. It is also a vital route for the transportation of oil to Bab el-Mandeb Strait in the south to the Suez Canal in the north. This is one important thing that we need to think about. If Iran wants to control the oil flow through the Red Sea and Mediterranean Sea, then southern entrance to the Red Sea and Suez Canal must be controlled. Okay, and in order to control the Red Sea, Iran will need Somalia, will need Eritrea as well, but also it will need Ethiopia. So in order to gain significant influence in Ethiopia, then Iran need to use Eritrea and Somalia. It is a little complicated matter, but I'll try to make it shorter. Iran has attempted to use proxies in different regions in order to gain a greater influence. And so if we want to talk about Iran's past and recent activities at seas, we can start from 2001, Santorini, the case of Santorini in the Mediterranean Sea, near the Lebanese coast. Again, Iran involved in this. Iran was involved. Santorini, it is joint activities to make floatable sealed container just under the water surface, and the boat can collect them. And what is the container? What is it? It is for keeping or securing weapons. So it is kind of like smuggling activities. And in 2002, Korean possibly that's how you say it, Israel Navy seized a freighter that carries 55 tons of high-grade uranium weapons loaded in the Persian Gulf. Another example of Iran's past activities, ships captured. Ships connected to England, like oil tanker, Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, Rawabi cargo, and the ships connected to other U.S. allies. Another example is PA's purchase of a large cargo ship. Iran has disputes with the West over Iran's nuclear program, ambition for influence, and of course its goal to annihilate, to destroy Israel. And since May 2009, Soleimani was the key strategist of Iran's aggressions at seas. And led by Soleimani, Iran tried to smuggle advanced weaponry for its proxies. And it also attempted, or actually not only attempted, but it helped networks to smuggle weapons for naval attacks. And in 2019, there was tension in the Strait of Hormuz, attacks on oil tanker in the region in May and June 2011, and the downing of a US drone by Iran in June 2019. Okay, in November 8, 2021, Al Hudaydah Beach, just near Gulf of Eden, suicide boat, detonation of 14 runs of mines in the south of the Red Sea. And according to various sources, in December 7, 2021, U.S. Navy seized the weapons from the two vessels in the Arabian Seas. And in 2022, January 3rd, Houthis and Rawabi captured the Rawabi, a United Arab Emirates cargo. So these are Iran's past and present activities at seas. Most of these activities were supported by Iran. And during Abraham Accord, the Kurds force and Hezbollah operatives smuggled at seas as well. Iran has certain strategy. Red Sea strategy involved Ethiopia. Some might not argue, might not agree with my argument that it will involve Ethiopia. But Ethiopia is actually an interesting case. And Eritrea and Somalia have to be part of the strategy. Eritrea delivered a shipment of arms for Al-Shabaab through Somalia. In the past, Somalia cut ties with Iran because of the perception that Iran poses security threats in the Horn of Africa. But at the end, Iran has significant influence in Somalia. Iran also has several proxies. Al-Qaeda, Stephen Mahdi, army in Iraq. This is the proof that Iraq can fall in the hands of Iran. But again, I need to collect more evidence for this. And Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan, otherwise regime in Syria, and of course Hezbollah. It is necessary to note that Iran is excellent in making or in moving in when there is a breakdown in the government authority. Another strategy is maintaining close relationship or strategic alliance with Moscow. How? Have a look at the Caspian Sea. Oh, Caspian Sea. Up there, Caspian Sea. There's a direct route from Iran to Russia, and it can deliver mortars, drones, and different armaments. And Iran also has missiles like Al-Shabaab, and Sigil missile. It is a wing cruise missile, and it can be launched for anywhere in the Yemeni Republic and can reach at any point in the Red Sea. There are two types of missiles that Iran have. First is short-range tactical rockets, and dozens have been shipped or delivered or transferred to Hezbollah during the war in 2006, and they are called Zilzal or earthquake. And another type is ballistic missiles. One thing that is interesting is the development or the existence of Hwasong 15, Hwasong 18, and they are from North Korea. And we can tell from this, North Korea and Iran has close relationship in terms of nuclear power or nuclear relations and weaponry. So, how do non-state actors interact with the naval strategies of state actors in the MENA region, and what are the security implications? Iran has been sponsoring these proxies and non-state actors, and the intervention of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in Yemen in the escalation of naval terrorist activities will be the threat to international shipping. Iran also recruited mercenaries and foreign soldiers. Well, we call them soldiers, non-state soldiers, and train them to attack ships. And Yemenis, Lebanese, Iraqis, Syrians, and African, they recruit them. Iran recruit them. for attacking ships. And Iran also offer forces to form proxy naval units. And the training for these proxies was conducted in the Persian Gulf, Qasem Island, and Faroe Island. Faroe Island, I think it is not, it is uninhabited, I'm not sure. Another activity is smuggling network using a small boat along the coast of the Sea of Oman. And I did mention earlier that transferring weapons will involve the third country. Transferring weapons to Yemen will involve Somalia. So the next question is, in what way does the evolving maritime security environment in the MENA region challenge traditional theories of naval powers and strategic thinking? There are several theories, but I don't want to explain this in details because they're quite boring. But one thing that I'd like us to think is the solidarity of littoral state effective to counter this kind of issue? And how about supporting certain Middle Eastern leaders by backing naval powers in the Indian Ocean and Mediterranean Sea? Is it a good approach? Because it has kept the Red Sea open. I do not know the answer, but we need to think about this, especially when we utilize what do we call it? So strategic critical thinking. And from my explanation, of course we are aware of this, the calculated Iran strategy will involve Israel and the US. How about the European powers? Yes, possibly the US is, the role of the US is diminishing, and possibly some might say that the Europeans' power influence or role is diminishing, or maybe no power, no influence. But I would say no, because if you have a look at the role or the existence or the presence of the European military in armed deals surrounding Iran, in Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Algeria, Uganda, Republic of Congo, Sudan, and South Sudan, and Arabian Sea, Djibouti, Somalia, Uzbekistan, and beyond that, Cyprus. Iran is actually surrounded without knowing that Iran is surrounded, but Iran's strategy is, Iran's aim is Israel and the United States. This is my thinking. Yes, okay. The aim is Israel and the United States. But by being the gatekeeper of the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, the Europeans feel threatened. And the development of missiles that can reach not only the Middle East and Israel, but also can reach the European countries. Iran is a threat to the European powers. So this is something to think about. And I think it is interesting to learn more about this aspect. Thank you.
Wow, fantastic, Anita. Thank you very much for that. I'm now torn between two things. First of all, to comment on that. Second, lunch break. Up to you, Let's share the man.
Lunch break, if you have a question, we can
Yeah,
talk.
We can continue to talk.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
So,
Yeah,
okay.
we have lunch at the restaurant.
In the restaurant?
We have lunch
Thank you very much.
downstairs at the
Thanks.
restaurant. Thank you.
That's better.
Yes.
Yeah, this is very, very
I'm told the live streaming is very good. Jacob was telling me.
Oh, no, yeah, it worked well. It worked well. Just